Well, folks, I know the 2028 election is still just a little under 4 years out, but there are Republicans who are already gearing up for a 2028 run, and we must address who is going to be the presidential frontrunners in 2028 for the Republicans. We're going to be looking at who we expect to jump in the race and who will be best positioned to win the 2028 election for the Republican Party. But before we get into it, drop down below, hit that subscribe button, make sure you never miss another video from our channel in the future. Now we're going to start off with the heir apparent right now, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is currently the vice president. He is a former senator from Ohio, and really dependent on the next 4 years, how the Trump administration performs and how J.D. Vance performs inside of the Trump administration is going to be a big factor on whether he can win in a general election in 2028. I would say since being selected as the VP, Vance has rose to every occasion. You look at the debate against Tim Walz. He's been a very strong and well-spoken surrogate for the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. He's someone who's not going to back down from criticism. You look what he did with Zelensky when they came to the Oval Office. Vance, he's from Ohio, which we know could potentially have really, really good appeal with Rust Belt voters. We know, looking at a presidential map for 2028, these are our swing states: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. We know for the Republicans, let's just go under the assumption that the Republicans are able to hold Georgia and North Carolina. Pennsylvania puts them there. It's like that's all they need. But you look at this. If Republicans can win, all they need to do, they need to have one out of 4 if they can hold these Rust Belt states right here. That's why it's going to be so important for J.D. Vance to win. Because if he's going to be the nominee in 2028, we need to have someone who's going to have good appeal with Rust Belt voters. And I have a hard time seeing the Republicans lose in Nevada and Arizona again, which it's like that just starts to open up the map in so many different ways. You look at holding North Carolina and Georgia, there's a million ways to get to 270 for the Republicans, and it looks very daunting for the Democrats. But here's the thing, J.D. Vance is a down-to-earth person, and that could help him out extremely well in the 2028 election. You look, he's had many encounters with opposition protesters. He is willing to stop while he's walking in the streets. It's like there was a video just a couple days ago of him with his daughter walking in the street. A bunch of protesters were interrupting him, and so he stopped and talked with them. That's what we're looking for in a vice president and a future president. He's willing to engage with the opposition. These people who are so radical, he's willing to engage with them. That's what we need. Now jumping over and looking at the next, I'd say number 2 on the list for who could be the 2028 nominee for the Republicans. That would be Ron DeSantis. He's currently the governor of Florida. He'll be term limited in 2026. We know DeSantis, he won the governor's seat in 2018 by roughly about 30,000 votes, and immediately started to garner massive amounts of support from people, independents and Democrats, who did not vote for him. Then he cemented himself into Florida politics when DeSantis refused to violate the rights of individuals during the 2020 COVID pandemic. He reopened his economy faster than almost any other state in the country and was a very vocal critic of Dr. Anthony Fauci. Because then you saw it come to life in 2022 in his re-election bid. DeSantis won re-election by 1.5 million votes. He turned the purple state of Florida into a state that now has a 1.1 million voter advantage for the Republicans in a state that 20 or 30 years ago, Democrats couldn't even imagine Republicans closing the gap on the voter registration advantage that the Democrats had at the time. But it is very fair to say that his 2024 bid for the presidency hurt him very badly. When he ran against Trump, that hurt him very, very badly in the Republican Party. Not saying he can't recover, but it hurt him in the short term. We know Trump and DeSantis have made amends since then, but, I guess a positive you can take away from the 2024 election is DeSantis is still sitting on about $9 million in cash left over from his 2024 bid. That he could use that for the campaign, which could help him get ahead in 2028. But ultimately, at this point, I believe J.D. Vance this is his time to shine, unless there is some major shift in the party or some major mess up on Vance's part. I think this is Vance's nomination to lose. We're going to see what happens. But ultimately, Ron DeSantis comes in at a solid number 2 here. Now we're going to jump over. Let's look at Nikki Haley. Let's find her up here. I've got a few things to say about neocon Nikki. Nikki Haley, as we know, she was the South Carolina governor for, I believe, I think she served 2 terms. I think. Maybe not. Maybe only one. I can't remember. But she served as the South Carolina governor and then served as Trump's ambassador to the United Nations during his first term. And she ran for president in 2024 and eventually dropped out and endorsed President Trump. Now, Haley claims to be a moderate and, and she can get support from all across the aisle. But I think you do a little digging into this and it's just not the reality. You could see how it's so untrue. She might be able to get Democrats and independents to support her in the primary, as what happened in 2024. You had massive amounts of Democrats and independents switching their party affiliation and voting in the Republican Party. And there are some states that have open primaries where Democrats can vote in the Republican primary. They were getting out there and voting for Nikki Haley. She may have had a little support from in the Republican Party, but a lot of her support was coming from Democrat donors and independents and Democrat voters. That's just the simple reality of it. They weren't there to support Nikki Haley. They were there to hurt the Trump campaign. It's as simple as that. These people were not voting for her because they were going to vote for her in the general election. It was because they wanted to hurt President Trump and his election. Because those same supporters, like we said, would have turned around, voted for Democrats in the general election, and they most likely did. And I think nominating Haley would be a return to the GOP politics that gave America the worst president, or second to worst, Barack Obama. And it would be a horrible thing for our country to revert back to those failed Republican policies that, George H.W. Bush lost to Bill Clinton then. George W. Bush, it was so bad during him that he gave us Barack Obama. We do not want to revert back to those America Last policies, warmongering policies. We do not want to revert back to that. Please, God, do not let us. Do I think in a general election she might fare well? Sure, I think she'd fare well in a general election. I think there'd be a lot of America First MAGA supporters who would not vote for her, which I think could very much hurt her. But I think if you're looking at an electorate overall, I think she would do well, but doesn't mean I think she'd be a good president. I can think of a lot of people I'd rather have president before Nikki Haley. Let's just put it that way. But then looking at Vivek Ramaswamy, he ran in 2024, really brought him up onto the national stage. He was a venture capitalist, and now he's running to be Ohio's next governor. He's running to replace outgoing Governor Mike DeWine, who is term limited. And right now, it appears that Vivek is focused on building a state-level political base instead of a national base, at least for now. He's working on what he needs to do in Ohio to win. I don't expect him to jump in the 2024 race. His name's been floated out there, and if you're looking at polling, he's polling on average around 7%. I just don't see it happening. I don't think, maybe later on down the road. But if he jumps in, if he's in the Ohio governor's race and he wins, I just do not see it happening. But now to jump over to another governor who we might see something from, and I don't have his thing pulled up here. Here we go. Governor Glenn Youngkin of the great state of Virginia. Virginia. As we know, Youngkin, he's term limited in 2025 here. He became the governor elected in 21, inaugurated in 22, and he became the first Virginia GOP governor since 2009, I think. And now that he's term limited, it could open up his ambitions to run for a national run. He no longer has to be running or worrying about what he's going to do in Virginia. He can look at national ambitions, and he is very popular in the Republican Party and nationally. He's a Republican in a Democrat state that has a 53, 54, 55% approval rating. That doesn't just happen by accident. When Youngkin won back in 22, he did it by focusing on parental rights and getting critical race theory out of the schools. This was a very, very popular win-in message during the COVID pandemic when radical liberals, school birds, were shutting down schools for much, much longer than necessary. There have also been a lot of talk about him running for Senate in 2026 against incumbent Senator Mark Warner in Virginia. And really, Youngkin is seen as the only serious challenger as of now to Mark Warner, but there is no decision that has been final. I think it would, Glenn Youngkin, run for Senate. Run for the Senate. Let's try and cement as much Republican power as we can in Washington for as long as possible. And if Trump is able to follow through on his domestic spending agenda and his domestic policies, I think you can make a very good case that it's going to be very good for Republicans in 26. It's very easy to also make the case how it wouldn't be so great for Republicans. But as we know, you want to look at the Virginia, let's look at the Virginia 2026 Senate race where, and actually we're going to go back and look at it. In 2020, he was elected by a nice margin. But when he was initially elected back in 2014, look at this margin here. It's like this is less than 20,000 votes right here. Now, obviously, 2014 was a good election for Republicans. There is no doubt about that. Very good election for Republicans. But at the same time, if Republicans can do that again in 26, you could be looking at a close race with a very, very popular outgoing governor potentially running for the Senate. I think that could be a big move for him. I'm not as much against him running for president in 26. I just feel like it would be a better idea for him to run for the Senate to run for the presidency in 2028. Not as much against it, but I think it would be better for him to run for the Senate right now. Consider your options. Now, we're going to move on to someone who I think would be terrible for him to run for president in 2028, but he must run for Senate in 2026, and that would be Governor Brian Kemp. Brian Kemp, he's the incumbent governor in Georgia. He's a very, very popular governor of Georgia. Not very well liked by the Republican base nationally, though. We know in 2020, with the President Trump's election denialism, he wanted Brian Kemp to figure out a way to find him votes, and Brian Kemp stood tall and would not do it, which I applaud him for doing that. I'm a big supporter of President Trump, but Brian Kemp did the right thing here. And he has thrown out there that he may be running for president in 2028, but also that he may be running for the Senate in 2026. We know Jon Ossoff is up for re-election here in 2026. Brian Kemp is seen as the best contender, the most realistic possibility that the Republicans have to flip this seat. The Republicans in the Senate are trying to get to 55 seats. That goes through Michigan and that goes through Georgia. President Trump won the state by about 2.5 points. There is no reason why there should be a Democrat who is overseeing overseeing the state of Georgia in the Senate. There just shouldn't be. Brian Kemp should stay in Georgia, run for the Senate, become a great senator. He could become a very, very popular senator. I think he is one of the most conservative members in the Republican Party, no doubt. But just with what happened in 2020, there's a lot of people who don't like him from that. I'm very fond of Brian Kemp, but I just don't think it would be a good idea for him to run in 2028. Run for the Senate, become a senator, stay there. Because it will be much, much better for the Republican Party if he's in the Senate. Instead of Ossoff winning re-election and then Brian Kemp running for president and most likely losing. So it's like, Brian Kemp, you've got two options. You can either not be involved in politics, which means you run in 28 and you lose, or you can be a very, very integral Republican senator who has a lot of sway in Washington, D.C., who's very, very popular from Georgia, and you can beat Jon Ossoff and do the Republican Party a great service. That's just my thought. These are the top, and it's like, most likely, I see Glenn Youngkin, I see Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and J.D. Vance jumping in the race in 2028. If we're looking at who do I think is going to be best positioned to win, as of right now, I have to say J.D. Vance with Ron DeSantis as a close second. I think J.D. Vance will be a great, great president if he were to run in 2028. But I also think that DeSantis could be a very good president as well. But as of right now, I have to throw my support, not an endorsement, but as of right now, this is J.D. Vance's race to lose. If he's a good cheerleader for the administration, the base will reward him well. They know they have a good candidate in Ron DeSantis to fill those shoes if it were to come to that. So as long as Vance does what he's supposed to do, he most likely will be the front runner in 28. But the Republicans know they've got a very good candidate in DeSantis who's on his heels if it's absolutely necessary. So that's going to wrap things up for today, folks. Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments. Is there anybody else you want me to add into this list? I'm going to try and do another video on this maybe next month in April on who the front runners are for 2028. Let me know who you'd like me to see in this breakdown. We'll catch you next time.